Russian occupiers are trying to break through the defensive lines of the Ukrainian Armed Forces in the Kupiansk direction simultaneously in several areas. This is stated in the report of the Institute for the Study of War. The Russian army wants to use its numerical advantage in combat-ready infantry, which is why it has made slight advances, analysts claim. Mainly, the fighting is taking place in the area of the Oskil River. The Russians are having difficulties moving heavy equipment from the left to the right bank here. The enemy claims to have captured Kondrashevka, north of Kupiansk, according to the General Staff. This information has not been confirmed. The enemy is also putting pressure in the Pokrovsk direction. There were 49 assaults in just the past 24 hours. Ukrainian defenders, in particular Special Operations Forces fighters, are successfully countering the enemy in this sector of the front. Our defenders showed how they cleared a DPO building where Russian assault groups had entrenched themselves and captured 9 soldiers. The main intelligence directorate shared their successes. The special unit Primary, for the first time in history, shot down 2 enemy amphibious aircraft, Chaika. They are equipped with expensive equipment for detecting and combating submarines. Along with the 2 enemy aircraft during the operation in Crimea, the Primary unit also struck another Mi-8 enemy helicopter. On motorcycles and on foot in the Orikhiv direction, the occupiers have intensified their assaults, attacking both at night and during the day. We have to stop the enemy with both drones and shells. Our artillerymen are doing everything they can to prevent the enemy infantry from approaching our fortifications. Due to heavy losses in manpower, the enemy is searching for our artillerymen using both guided bombs and kamikaze drones. That's why during this segment you'll see a QR code. The soldiers of the 65th Separate Mechanized Brigade are raising funds for drones to counter the enemy in the air as well. A report from the Orikhiv direction by TSN correspondent Ruslan Yarmolyuk.
The roar of a shot shatters the silence of the forest thickets. Clouds of smoke from the cannon settle down to the ground.
At infantry positions, at UAVs, at command posts, at various vehicles, and also at armored vehicles. Everything they meticulously spot, they immediately shoot at. So...
Our aerial reconnaissance spotted groups of occupiers in the grove. The crew takes their positions in the turret and waits for the order from the senior officer. A 40-kilogram shell is loaded into the barrel, and in a moment the 152mm shell flies toward the enemy motorcyclist position.
Mostly they come in small infantry groups, on mopeds, on motorcycles. Well, their previous assault group, the armored group was advancing. A tank was moving, armored vehicles were moving, but they didn't make it, didn't complete their mission. They were destroyed.
The main task is not to let enemy infantry get close to our positions. In this crew, almost all the older men have been through the ATO. Sashko went to war at 18 back in 2018. Now, even though he's the youngest, he skillfully and already with experience commands the crew.
It's important to be approachable, to show that you're a person, not just focus on the fact that you're a commander, subordinates, war drones, cables. Well, fundamentally, there are differences, what the war was like before and what it's like now. For example, artillery is used much more often now. Before it wasn't used as much, but now it's very frequent.
Every shot from our artillery has to be precise because on the other side, their artillerymen are working too, and they immediately start shelling everything around in grid patterns. The enemy doesn't have a shell shortage, and their aviation uses guided bombs to destroy everything, searching for the positions of our gunners.
Sometimes it happened every single day. Every day, and sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. They come in, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in threes. 3 of them come at once. Cluster munitions, high explosive shells. It's a very unpleasant and truly disturbing weapon because it really affects your psychological state and your psyche.
However, the biggest threat to the gunners is drones. There are constantly reconnaissance drones in the air paired with strike drones. That's why we have to constantly monitor the sky and change positions from time to time.
FPV drones, especially in this area, there are a lot of them. Everything flies on fiber optics. If you jam me, there are guys with shotguns working here. They destroy them with shotguns.
Ruslan, a former builder from Vinnytsia region, was drafted after receiving his summons. He previously fought in the ATO and says that now at the positions he always has a shotgun with him. There are many drones on fiber optics that the jammer can't detect, so we have to keep looking up as well.
Recently, I successfully managed to shoot down 2 of them, but unfortunately, 2 others still got through. The fiber optic ones are big, and they carry a lot of explosives.
The guys are tired, but it's more mental than physical exhaustion. But they don't complain. They do their job because they know that the lives of the infantry and the lives of their loved ones, whom they are protecting here on the Orikhiv front, depend on them.
Yeah, it's tough, but we know we have to do it. We know why we're here and who we're here for. We know that back home we have wives, children, parents, people we love and cherish. And we know that we have to protect them, to protect our country.
New coordinates come in and the cannon is once again aimed at the Orikhiv fields where enemy infantry is advancing, and so it goes, 24 hours a day. Ruslan Yaremliuk, Mikhailo Potera, TSN, 1+1 Marathon and United News.
The Ukrainian Defense Forces destroyed 2 enemy military depots near temporarily occupied Bodani. In the Luhansk region, the occupiers tried to organize the distribution of ammunition. Ammunition was delivered to the field depot of a Russian tank regiment. Tens of thousands of mines, grenades, and cartridges of various types, as well as thousands of rounds for tanks and shells for artillery. Units of the armed forces and the security service destroyed the regimental depot along with its vehicles. Ukrainian defenders also struck a logistics hub for drone distribution. The warehouse stored 19,000 various aerial vehicles and related equipment, batteries, communication modules, and video transmitters. Andriy Tkachuk is already known. He is an officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, a political scientist, and a volunteer. We will talk about the situation at the front and the actions currently taking place in various directions.
Welcome on air.
Greetings, glory to Ukraine.
Mr. Andriy, let's start with the counter-offensive operation of the Ukrainian Defense Forces that is taking place in the Donetsk region. Commander-in-Chief General Oleksandr Syrsky reported that this happened 2 days ago. During the operation in the Dobropilya direction, Ukrainian forces broke through the enemy's defenses, advancing to a depth of 3 to 7 kilometers and liberating 160 square kilometers of territory. As of today, is this operation still ongoing? What is happening there? Is there any information? What is the current dynamic of events in the Dobropilya direction?
Overall, this is the kind of positive news that we can cautiously talk about as of today in the Dobropilya area. Overall, in the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya direction, if we can combine them into one. Why do I say into one? Because in fact the events in the Dobropilya direction are events that directly influence the development of events and the pressure on Pokrovsk from the north. To the north of the settlement for us, that includes Mirnograd, Pokrovsk and Rodinska. Accordingly, we managed to push back the enemy there. In some cases, the enemy is in operational encirclement, and in others, already in physical encirclement. According to Colonel Manikar, who is the head of the Assault Troops Directorate of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there are 3 such positions that we can talk about. One is closer to Pokrovsk, where, from what can be said, there is almost a physical encirclement of the enemy, and an operational encirclement as well, already closer to Pokrovsk, between Dobropilya and Pokrovsk. These are 2 locations where we are managing to press the enemy further. In a difficult situation there, the 51st Russian Army is present. Our units have conducted effective combat operations, including the National Guard of Ukraine, the 1st Corps of the Azov National Guard, as well as our airborne assault troops, particularly the 79th and 82nd Assault Brigades, who are currently operating directly on this section of the front. Last week, I visited them with the deputy head of the office, walking through the forest with the colonel, presenting awards and in fact assessing the situation to determine what the units need in order to conduct more active combat operations. Accordingly, to the north of Pokrovsk, the situation is stabilizing today. That's why I say we should be cautiously optimistic. As always, there's no need to get carried away or start throwing our hats in the air. This is definitely not in our favor, and we shouldn't do it. The enemy is trying to strengthen their fortifications. They have transferred not only forces from Sumy region there, but also from Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, adding extra combat fortifications. They have concentrated a military contingent of 110,000 to 130,000 troops in the Pokrovsk direction. And because of this, there is a certain balance of forces. If we are pressing from the north and achieving successes, then in the south, although the enemy's advance is small, they are still making progress south of Pokrovsk. This is the entire stretch of the front from Udakne to Shevchenko. That is where the enemy is active and where the enemy is concentrating aviation along this section of the front. A lot of sorties, between 25 and 30 per day, that's a huge number. From my own experience, even 10 sorties a day make it difficult to carry out certain logistical operations to supply your unit. So when it's 25 to 30, it's clear that this gives the enemy a significant advantage. Accordingly, the enemy does this to destabilize our units as much as possible and to prevent us from catching those small infantry groups that are trying to probe for weak spots and advance south of Pokrovsk.
I want to clarify, when we carry out such counter-offensive operations, how is the enemy's defensive line structured at this moment? So we find ourselves in a situation where we are defending and the enemy will be pressing on our defensive line. Here we are conducting a counter-offensive action. The enemy has a defensive line that can stop us and complicate things for us with mined areas. Does he only have a front flank where he concentrates his strike forces and breaks through, which theoretically gives us some operational space?
One of the successes of the Dobrobilska operation is that the enemy did not have time to entrench themselves in the positions they had taken. We remember those so-called rabbit ears, those deep penetrations almost reaching Dobropilia from the east of the settlement. The enemy did not have time to dig in and fully equip their strong points. They only had about 2 weeks there to do this before we began our counter-offensive actions. Accordingly, our counter-offensive actions were swift, decisive and rapid, which allowed us to push the enemy back to the positions they had previously occupied. And it is precisely these 160 kilometers about which General Syrski spoke that are the result of a comprehensive effort where we managed to use this time very quickly and efficiently, and in addition to respond to the challenges that the enemy created for us in this direction. So here the key factors were speed, a prompt response and the successful actions and coordination of certain units.
While we are talking about successful actions and counter-offensive operations in the Pokrovsk area, the situation in the Kupiansk region is the opposite. If we look at the map, the red areas are already closer to Kupiansk. The Institute for the Study of War, the American one, reported today that a large number of infantry is advancing toward Pokrovsk and, for the most part, moving toward Kupiansk. They emphasized that for the most part, heavy fighting is now taking place on the right bank of the Oskil River because it is difficult for them to move equipment from the left bank and bring it up. And that is why they are now trying to advance with infantry. Please tell us, why did they start offensive actions in the Kupiansk area at this particular moment? And is it possible to connect what is happening in Donetsk region with what is now happening in Kharkiv region?
Obviously, yes, this is a complex set of tasks for the Russians until the end of autumn, until deep autumn, before the onset of winter, when the foliage falls and there is nowhere to hide in the groves to enter populated areas. The fact that they managed to enter Kupiansk from the north is a bad sign for us, and the situation is not good when the enemy occupies some houses, basements and warehouses and starts using not geography but urban objects to shield themselves from our drones, because at the moment we have difficulties with infantry, which is now mainly concentrated in the Pokrovsk direction and elsewhere, and now there is a redeployment and operational transfer of certain special units to Kharkiv region, to Kupiansk. But again, this is just firefighting, and if the enemy has already entered the city, it is not a very good situation, because they are fulfilling the task they set for themselves for this summer-autumn campaign, namely to enter populated areas to hide from our infantry and drones. Because it is extremely difficult to catch the enemy in the city with infantry, the enemy disregards the rules of war, disguises themselves as civilians, blends in with the population as much as possible, and uses civilians as a human shield for their maneuvers. As for the Oskil River, indeed, they are trying to transfer their forces to the right bank, losing significant amounts of personnel and equipment, because at these crossings we are hitting them with both infantry and drones and clearing our territory of the enemy there. But accordingly, the enemy is stretching our defense forces from Kupiansk itself to the right bank of the Oskil in order to create the most advantageous positions for themselves to penetrate the city. Speaking of which, the Russians have had some success in so-called pipe wars, where they crawled through sewer pipes, and
our defense forces were fully prepared for this impending situation and successfully repelled these aggressive assaults there.
And one of the absolutely key pipes through which the Russian forces were actively advancing and deploying their specialized pipe troops was completely flooded, and the entire operation was indeed successful, even though before that the enemy had been very actively using this particular tactic.
It has already been noted that the enemy is redeploying forces to the Pokrovsk direction from various areas, including from the Sumy region. I'd like to ask, what is happening there? This morning, information appeared that the Russian armed forces had raised a flag in Oleksivka, Sumy region. How successful have we been in stopping the Russians' idea to continue their offensive in Sumy region now? And
to create a kind of buffer zone, which they talked about in Suwalki and which they
used to threaten with an offensive towards Kyiv in the summer.
This enemy operation has been completely thwarted. I talked about this back in April and May when I mentioned Kupiansk, that it would be the second most difficult settlement after Azniak in Sumy region. The enemy did not have the capability to advance towards our regional center, which is exactly what we are seeing today, even though the enemy is now trying to pull up reserves to Oleksivka and has already redeployed its naval infantry, taking them from Sumy and Kursk regions and moving them to the Dobropilya direction. Now the enemy is trying to reinforce the Sumy operation with the 810th Battalion, but they are not succeeding. We, on the other hand, have successes in Oleksivka, successes in Kostiantynivka, and there is an operational encirclement of Russians in certain settlements. So everything has come to what it should have been. The Russians have no prospects for developing the operation in Sumy region. Their current attempts to throw in some efforts, some forces, are absolutely reasonable, but let them keep wearing down their troops. Today, the territorial defense units and other units we have in our direction in Sumy region are sufficient to conduct offensive actions, and they are succeeding effectively. So today we can say that the Russians have failed in Sumy region, and our positions there are strong and objectively sound. And
the Russians on the Sumy front are also being reinforced by North Korean military, because we all saw how they showed themselves. They all pulled back, and now they're trying to present themselves as such brave soldiers. Just imagine.
You see, there was information about the use of North Korean troops in the temporarily occupied territories, but I think that after the losses suffered by the North Korean forces, this information was adjusted accordingly. The information that came to light, thanks to South Korean intelligence, somewhat destabilized the situation regarding North Korea, and I believe this influenced the enemy not to use North Korean troops in the temporarily occupied territories. It is quite possible that this was one of the psychological and informational operations against us, suggesting that additional North Korean troops would be deployed, although in reality, with the mobilization and contract soldiers, the Russians do not currently need separate reinforcements to amass a sufficiently large number of personnel at the front.
On Saturday, there was a meeting between the president and journalists in the Formaggio Freg, during which he noted that a new actual branch of the military would be created in Ukraine, assault troops. They will be separated into a distinct component. Assault brigades will be formed, although in principle we already have them. But he emphasized that this would be a new format with a drone component and everything necessary to fight effectively and deliver results, showing that such a unit exists in our forces. What could this format of separate assault troops be, especially considering the constant changes in the format of war and the emergence of new technologies? What could they be equipped with to distinguish them from other units? What is the purpose of creating all this?
Such a separate assault unit, given that there are already quite a few within the structure of the defense forces?
Frankly, I also don't really have an answer to that. Well, first of all, this is a question for certain colleagues, journalists from OFREG probably, or at least those from OFREG who should have kept some information non-public, and maybe there are still some thoughts on how to properly announce such an event. That's one thing. I don't know who had this information. Well, this information,
which is fully allowed to be made public and readily available.
Then the second point concerns the situation with the assault. And why aren't the air assault forces suitable for us? In my opinion, and here I support the position of the Deep State Analytical Portal, this is a devaluation of the achievements and work of the air assault forces, who are actually handling these important tasks today. Yes, within the ground forces we have separate assault troops, assault brigades, but is it necessary to create a separate command for them? At this moment, it seems to me that this is the Commander-in-Chief's initiative to have his own kind of mobile guard and to be able to respond quickly to certain events. Although at the moment I don't see any situations where they are not responding. For example, today these same air assault forces, we mentioned the 79th and 82nd Brigades, are working absolutely effectively and efficiently in the Polisk direction. So is there really a need to create some new bureaucratic structures? Maybe it would make sense to create a separate assault corps. We have a good colonel, Roju Karina Mankopri, whom I already mentioned today, and as practice shows today, they can also respond in different sectors of the front. If we really needed this corps, it should be subordinated to the air assault forces that already exist. So at the moment, these are my thoughts regarding this news. Will it change anything significantly? We'll see. And also the international
I'd also like to touch on the international component. We have about half a minute left. Because regarding the probing of NATO borders, Russia's MiG-31s have again spent more than 10 minutes in the airspace of another NATO member country. And Petr Pavel, the president of the Czech Republic, said that such aircraft should be shot down, citing the example of Turkey, which did this 10 years ago with a Russian plane. They shot it down, and after that, the Russian aircraft never returned there and didn't try to probe the alliance's borders again. What would you say to that? And Trump said he is ready to defend Poland and the Baltic countries in case of a threat. But you could say that this threat has already materialized. Shaheds have been shot down. Missiles have fallen on Polish territory more than once. What could become the breaking point, the last straw, when patience finally runs out?
The Russians don't need anything. Everything is working out for them efficiently and perfectly. In reality, they continue to wage a hybrid war, even though Europe either refuses to acknowledge it or does so reluctantly, even though the war is already being waged against NATO countries and EU countries. What we are seeing are elements of hybrid warfare. For example, the conditional incursion of Geran drones and decoys into Polish territory cost Russia about $500,000, while Europe has already lost $50 billion. This includes funds allocated to Poland, troop deployments, and economic losses due to aircraft. Accordingly, the same thing will continue to happen in the future. It will go on. The enemy is using hybrid tactics to influence these countries in order to weaken their economies and sow panic among them.
Thank you for being with us today. Andriy Tkachuk, officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, political scientist and volunteer. Next, we have an emotional recharge, and then we'll return to this studio to talk about veterans, veterani.